for the Institute, well, we have listed this out in our text that we sent you at the beginning. So colonial history is very important. We're talking about this in the German society. And we also need to be taking a look at the discourse and power structures and talking about this even further. So we would like to hear your perspectives with respect to this so that we can create an even greater culture focused on human rights. Now I'd like to talk a bit more about the project that we'll be discussing today in the online event. The project is entitled Building Bridges with Human Rights, Civic Education and Transformation Processes. So what do we want to achieve? We want to focus on transformation. We want to engage in dialogue. We will be focusing as well on artificial intelligence, climate change, in addition to ways in which people are not treated fairly. And we would like to look at all this under the guise of human rights. We would like to build a bridge here. We would like to ask ourselves the right with respect to the roles that human rights played with respect to transformation projects. We also want to help people to change. We want to help changes to take place. We also are asking ourselves how political processes can be, in conformity with human rights, in addition to bringing in the necessary actors to do so. So we started this project this year. We have had 10 events within this project, and we'll be having another closing project in November. We have further projects planned. These projects will have a methodological aspect to this as well. We are going to be speaking about participation, protection against discrimination, amongst other things. We are also developing material. We are currently developing material. We are developing education material, videos. We are making this videos in cooperation with the Georg Eckert Institute, amongst others. We are also doing some development in the background, and it is our goal to publish this material by the end of the year. If you are interested in these publications or the projects, you can obtain further information on our website, and you can also write us at any point in time. All right, now I'd like to go back to today's event. So I said we want to take a look at critical perspectives today. And today we have taken a look at postcolonial and decolonial human rights, critiques in this regard. And we want to just take a look at these different perspectives so that we can talk about human rights education today. We're not going to be focusing too much on critiques of human rights. We'll be focusing more so on education, with a view on post-colonial and decolonial human rights education, what we need to facilitate this to be perspective. We also want to make sure that, we're taking a look at Eurocentric knowledge. We want to transform this. And, our goal is to have a fairer society that, is embedded in human rights, of course. We want to ask ourselves, what kind of society do we want to live in? And this is all embedded in the text that we sent you, in addition to the text that is on the website. So today, we are not just talking about sharing education on post-colonialism. We also want to talk about the target groups, the actors that will take part in this education as well. We want to make sure that the spaces in which people are learning facilitate a good way of learning. We also want to offer training when it comes to declarations on human rights. And this is something that we would like to look in greater detail today, just so I can talk about making material to facilitate this. So I've just given you a few details with respect to the program. In the chat, you will see some information. You can see here the program, or rather the agenda. You can take a closer look at this. I'm not going to be giving any details now with respect to the agenda. We'll be starting with performance, and then we will be going into our panel discussion. And then afterwards, we will have a Q&A session, followed by a lunch break. After the lunch break, we will have our workshops.
Genau, soweit die ganz kurze inhaltliche Einordnung ist, genau.
That's just what I wanted to say up front with respect to the project and the agenda. You've also received the awareness concept. So, as I mentioned, it's important that within the project, it's really important for us to take a look at different perspectives. And therefore, our awareness team is going to be accompanying us throughout this process the entire time. Now, at this juncture, the awareness team will be introducing themselves and speaking about their concept. Now I'd like to hand it over to our awareness team.
Hallo.
Thank you very much.
Ich freue mich, Sie alle zu sehen.
So, good morning. I'm very happy to see you today. My name is Dario Campo. Together with the awareness team, we are going to be accompanying today's event. We have created an extra breakout room, and you can come into this breakout room at any time if, for example, you would like to speak with us, if you have an issue that you would like to discuss with us in greater detail. We are going to be just accompanying the event today and can be reached at any point via the chat function. So if you'd like to talk with us about what you're listening to, if you have any matters you think that are important, you can always go into a breakout session with us at any point in time. So if you have an issue that is an interpersonal issue that you'd like to talk about, we are here at your side throughout the entire event. We'd like to wish you a wonderful event. Thank you very much, Dario. Thank you very much to the awareness team. So now I'd like to move on to the agenda. We're going to be having a spoken word performance. We tried to find somebody to perform this for us that would be appropriate. We have found a great solution. We selected a poem for this. Joy Romanisi-Rohr is with us today. We would like to welcome Joy to the event. She is a singer, and she works at the German Theater in Hamburg. Before I hand it over to her, I'd like to just say a few words regarding the author. We chose the poem Decolonizing Knowledge from Grada Colomba. She's an author, psychologist, and interdisciplinary artist. She speaks about remembrance, trauma, and gender, in addition to racism, postcolonialism. She works with different formats, and she brings art and academics together. And she speaks about plantation memories in particular. We have posted the link to the original poem in the chat. I'd like to thank everybody, Virginia, Paula, everyone in the Orga team for all the amazing work that they've done. So now, when we hand it over to the performance artists, you'll be able to hear it in English. And we also be posting the German translation of this poem in the chat. I'd like to now hand it over to Joy.
When they speak, it is universal. When we speak, it is specific. When they speak, it is objective. When we speak, it is subjective. When they speak, it is neutral. When we speak, it is personal. When they speak, it is rational. When we speak, it is emotional. When they speak, it is impartial. When we speak, it is partial. They have facts. We have opinions. They have knowledge. We have experience. We are not dealing here with the peaceful coexistence of words, but rather with violent hierarchy, which defines who can speak and who can produce knowledge. Wenn Sie sprechen, ist es wissenschaftlich. Wenn wir sprechen, ist es unwissenschaftlich. Wenn Sie sprechen, ist es universell. Wenn wir sprechen, ist es spezifisch. Wenn Sie sprechen, ist es objektiv. Wenn wir sprechen, ist es subjektiv. Wenn Sie sprechen, ist es neutral. Wenn wir sprechen, ist es persönlich. Wenn Sie sprechen, ist es rational. Wenn wir sprechen, ist es emotional. Wenn Sie sprechen, ist es unparteiisch. Wenn wir sprechen, ist es parteiisch. Sie haben Fakten. Wir haben Meinungen. Sie haben Wissen. Wir haben Erfahrung. Wir haben es hier nicht mit einer friedlichen Koexistenz von Worten zu tun, sondern mit einer gewaltsamen Hierarchie, die festlegt, wer sprechen kann und wer Wissen produzieren darf. Dankeschön.
Ja, vielen Dank auch von mir an Joy.
Thank you very much, Joy Hamadi Savor. Well, maybe you need a moment to process that, to let it sink in. Okay. So again, thank you very much for these inspiring words. That text by Grada Quilombo, to be found in Decolonizing Knowledge, and I think it's a great introduction into today's topic. We have our panelists here today. They can feel free to talk about that a bit more, but they can also feel free to just let it sink in. We'll also have a portion of today's event where the participants will be able to take the floor, so feel free to reference the poem. Where is Soraya Gomez? Is she here? Has she arrived? Yes? People are nodding. Okay, I can't see her yet. Yes, okay, she's here. Wonderful. With the help of a hotspot, everything is possible. That's great. So I think the panel is complete. But again, thank you very much to Josephine Aquino-Soye for stepping in to be our host at the very last minute, because our original host has become ill at very short notice. So thank you very much, Josephine, for stepping in. Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra, for that introduction. Thank you again to Joy Hamadi Savor. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this at such short notice. We'll start with our panel discussion now. We'll have about 45 minutes for that, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. We'll stop the recording then, so your questions will not be recorded. So feel free to note down questions you might have for after the panel or ask them in the chat. So I'd like to welcome a very impressive panel. I'm happy to welcome you, Aki Krishnamurti. You are an empowerment supporter. You are an educator for theatre and dance, focusing on power relations from an intersectional perspective and focusing on racism and gender relations in different international contexts. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Next, Maria Domar Castro Varela. Maria, you are a professor of general education and social work here in Berlin at Al Salomon University, and you're an author of various publications on postcolonial theories. So you're just the person to be part of this panel today. And then last but not least, Soraya Gomez. You do so much, among others, you're a teacher. That's what you wanted us to introduce you as. So thank you very much for being here today. And let's start with the very first questions. We have so many questions to ask you, and our plan is to just see how far we'll get. There is no particular order of questions, so feel free to answer all questions that I'm asking you. There is no order. Feel free to choose yourself. If nobody feels like they'd like to start, I'll pick the first to reply to me. What is your understanding, or what do you think is the or post-colonial human rights education? What is that for you? And how does that influence your work? Would anybody like to start now? If not, I'll just pick randomly. Saraya, would you like to start? Yeah, thank you very much. I think I waited for good reason, because I feel like I'm the one asking the question, what is that? How does that influence our work? I'm not a scientist, a researcher. I am working at a state institution, so I'm very practical when it comes to these kind of elements. I'm right there when it comes to institutionalized racism and all these issues, and I see all the different aspects and limitations that we have. What I can say, though, I have tried to really link these issues. I try to read texts on de- and post-colonial theories in my classes. For example, from Maria's book, I always read that with my students. We work through those texts and look at the various approaches to that topic together. And we look at the contradictions within these approaches, and then we'll take a look at the classic human rights education and what that means actually. And we'll try to link that to questions with post-colonial aspects, try to link that to legal aspects, because particularly in Germany, with regards to political education, that plays a major role, the legal framework. And then we'll ask more questions. Is this or that something that's feasible here in Germany? Or at least we talk about different approaches, elements in our classes, in my classes, and we look at different methods, approaches, tasks and challenges. And we see what we can take from it, considering all the limitations of the issue that we're facing. And then we think about what that means for us in our classes, and beyond that in our lives, where we have to act, what we can do. Questions like, do we actually need school as it is at the moment? Or do we need to abolish these institutions, rethink them? And that's what we look at. We look at these kinds of approaches, about decolonial approaches. That's what we look at. We look at community learning, about learning together as a group. Maybe that's not what you wanted to hear now. I hope I didn't disappoint, but that's what I have to say. Yeah, I think that's great, asking more questions, not remaining still and always developing. And I think that's something we all wish for, and I think it's good of you to say that. We don't have all the solutions yet. Maria or Aki, would you like to go next? Yeah, I'd like to really step in now because I'm not a researcher either. I am also not part of institutionalized learning spaces, and I don't experience it as such, as a colonialized learning space. We work with racism, but we cannot understand it as such, as racism, without looking at these colonial aspects. To me, asking questions is so important, Saraya, just what you said, and that's why I wanted to take the floor right now. Asking questions in learning. Because we often strive for answers. It sometimes feels like we have more answers than we have questions, because many questions are rhetorical. And often we feel like there are the correct answers. And I think it's a great approach to really cultivate asking more questions, because often it's not easy to find solutions, to find answers. There are many contradictions, body and soul. We have many different forms of interacting, of learning together. I often work with the body. We have this binary way of thinking, and I'd like to question that in everyday life. However, I don't really say that that's what I do. I just try to let it influence my work and my teaching. We've had these contradictions forever. Also in this colonial thinking, and post-colonial thinking. It is about questioning the structures that we have. And it is a challenge in learning spaces. And it's a question of whether we can change that, whether we can decolonialize schools if they are established on the basis of these colonial structures. Thank you very much. Back to you, Maria. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here, for having me be part of the panel. Well, it's an honor to be here with these renowned persons, Soraya, Aki, great people, great minds thinking alike. I am in daily life, I work with these issues. I am a political activist, yes, that's what I'd say. I too believe that it's important to ask questions. But I think it needs to go hand in hand with having answers that we can then again question. We need questions, but we also need answers to continue from there. Professionally, I mainly work as a teacher, as a university professor. And the students, they seek some kind of guidance, stability. They need some kind of anchor to hold on to, some kind of answer from which they can then start asking questions anew. We have the fini, the Latin kind of end that we work with, but it's not the actual end, it's just an end, a plateau from which we then have to start anew to keep working and finding more solutions. The buzzwords that we have today are sometimes problematic because they often dilute the actual issue. Everything that's critical, everything to do with solidary thinking is what we call post-colonial. But there are specific aspects within that kind of approach, that kind of issue. So I think we need to really specify what we talk about, what we need to work on. It's an attempt to show how rights and the development of rights are connected to colonialism. And I think that's what the criticism is aimed at from those working with post-colonial theories. It's not about that we don't need human rights or that human rights are Eurocentric. Yes, they are, but at the same time, they are necessary. In post-colonial theory, we work a lot with exactly these ambivalent aspects. We are proponents of human rights. We fight for human rights, but at the same time, we are fully aware that human rights have developed in an era of European colonialism, in an era where the transatlantic trade with humans who then became slaves has been established. We're aware of that, and we're trying to think about these connections, but it's difficult. It's difficult, but at the theoretical level, we're trying to do that. And then that has implications on our daily life. It has implications for schools, universities, for the education of our workers, of our skilled workers. It's a dilemma. We need to tolerate that. And we wonder how to go from there, how to work on that dilemma. And we work on transforming it. Because we want to change the idea of human rights, and we want to further develop the human rights as they are. Wow, thank you very much for that first round of replies. Thank you for all these wonderful insights into your work. There are two different approaches, post-colonial and decolonial ideas. Some rather feel partial to one of the ideas work in that area more than in others. Is that true? Is that something that you can really separate? Is one of the others more than a buzzword or more of a buzzword than the other? Is something more accessible to the broader public? Which kind of different approaches are there? And which of the approaches influence you more in your daily life and daily work? Do you work with both ideas, or do you tend to prefer one or the other in your work and in your endeavors to change things? So I'm looking forward to your replies. Maria, you were the last to speak now. Maybe Aki could start now? Okay, no, I thought I wouldn't have to. Yes. I'm not working in that area academically, so I take ideas from where I feel I need to take them for my work. We have these post-colonial ideas, and they are very valuable, I believe, because they help us see how colonialism still works in daily life, how it's still present around us. It shows us a level of continuity in that regard. And I think these ideas are important as to understand where we are at the moment. I think there are others who know better, so feel free to correct me. So there's a focus on the interdependence between colony and center and the colonial past and the establishment or the development of modern ideas. It is a kind of binary thinking. So we have these two sides, although they are connected. But from my daily life, I work a lot with the people affected and with the people themselves. And I don't think it is that binary. I like the word decolonizing because it describes a process rather than saying decolonial. So from my daily work, I got to know these categories as categories that are to be questioned. So I think that both approaches are important in their own right. Thank you very much. Anybody who'd like to reply? If not, I'll pick the next speaker. Yes, I can continue. Because she has said a lot of important things. To me, those are not two separate positions that are opposed one to the other. They are connected, yes, but it's important to me to show that there are different consequences to each of the positions because they are different approaches. And that's what we need to understand. We have those two terms, post-colonial and decolonial theory. They both came up as part of US academic developments and ideas. They were developed by people who came to the US from former colonial states, who were then integrated and became part of the US society and then criticized colonialism. but those are just the beginnings. We have these theories from the very beginning. I like to speak of these migrating theories. These theories then migrated from the beginning phase, and then they ended up somewhere else, and then something happens. Just like when people migrate and change and become part of the culture they move to, and that's how post-colonial and decolonial theories migrated too. They changed, they evolved. So there are different movements back and forth from one place to another. We have a post-colonial theory. Historically speaking, it was the earlier of the two theories, starting right after the first criticism, after those newly established post-colonial states started criticizing colonialism in the 50s, particularly in Asia, and then continued in the 60s on the African continent, which was liberated one after the other from colonial reign. And that then is followed by criticism, together with liberation from colonialism or neocolonialism comes that criticism. So that's another important term, neo-colonialization, which was first coined in Ghana, that phrase. So there was liberation, but they are still caged in a colonial reign or system, a colonial system regarding ideas, repression, etc. So it's important to have that post-colonial theory and understand that it developed in the 50s and 60s and then was established in the 60s and strengthened in the 60s. The decolonial idea, I think, developed from the post-colonial theories as a kind of criticism. There are people saying, yes, but those are all European theories that are being used in post-colonial ideas. We need new approaches, different kinds of approaches. Also looking at the origin of colonial ideas and colonial systems, linked to criticism of the awareness and of information. And in the end, it often leads to rejection. I don't want anything to do with this information awareness, with these ideas. And that's where we see these kind of conflicts and the differences between the approaches for human rights education. That has consequences. So whenever I reject information and awareness, I reject many of the concepts that are valuable. Post-colonial theory, I think, for Valery Spivak as a very prominent voice, said that we need to face that. We need these different ideas of emancipation, freedom, liberation, democracy, but we don't have to accept them as they are. We need to see them in their connection to violence and colonialism. He said, turn it around, to put a different perspective on it. And I think the development of decolonial ideas from Nabiya Salah and a term that is really emancipating. It comes from South America. There are many theoretical thinkers working on that, working on the term decolonial. And it's something new. They added something new to it. Not only criticism, but they also seek for new approaches for the idea of being human, the idea of human rights beyond the European tradition. And that's why I believe myself to be a post-colonial thinker, but I'm also very inspired by other approaches, from that direction. Yeah, sorry for taking so long.
No problem. That was very interesting hearing about the way you talk about a decolonial human rights education, just speaking about the difficulties with respect to the theories that Europe awareness needs to be criticized a little bit, that we need to take a closer look at post-colonial history, for example, but also at the same time that there's different concepts that need to be included. So yeah, not taking a look at only post-colonial and decolonial aspects, and also taking into consideration that when we live this out in theory, it's going to, or rather in practice, it's going to look completely different. So thank you very much for your interesting remarks. It was quite exciting to hear what you're working on. And so Raya, I'd like to say a few words. Yeah, I'd like to just add, I think that we just heard some great remarks with respect to lectures, teachings. You know, we usually have questions and answers, and then we, replace old questions with new questions. But this is indeed working, we can say. We can take a look at the things that we've worked on already, and then we add the new research, and then we take a look at what we've done in the past and maybe think that what we did in the past isn't really relevant anymore. But it's also just good to take a look at everything, take a look at the different positions. It's good that we understand, each other, understand the different perspectives with respect to post-colonial theory, decolonial theory. We want to take a look at the differences therein, whether it comes to different movements or whether it comes from academics. So we just take a look at, different textbooks, I've seen some that put a focus on the pre-colonial times. And we then need to take a look at this material and question this as well. We take a look at, aspects such as patriarchy, whether or not this is included. This is all part of learning together. And we can take a look at the material and perhaps come to the conclusion that we just can't leave it as it's written. So, I'm making changes, and I'm going to be constantly making changes, For example, I'm, have my high school diploma questions that I'm writing right now, and I'm always changing these as well. But this is something that is really fruitful because we're always continuously thinking about things, changing things, learning from what has been done in the past, learning from curriculums of the past or current curriculums, why they've been written a certain way. We can take a look at this in a global and also more local context. And so that we can, create a link between students and human rights in addition to, post-colonial and decolonial history. This is something that's quite exciting. Maria, you raised your hand. I really like what Saraya said, and I just wanted to say one thing that seems quite important to me. This is something that I noticed in the past few years. Almost all of the traditional approaches that I've seen, or rather that come from the high schools and universities from the United States, are things that we need to take a look at. There are so many great theories that are being developed at present. We're also seeing this in the African continent, in addition to other Asian universities. So we've seen years of critiques being published with respect to post-colonial history, but we haven't yet seen how or spoken about how difficult it is for universities to work with texts and images that do not come from Western countries. This is something that would be important to take a look at. Then we would see that, in taking a look at post-colonialism, be it in Bolivia or India, they take a look at this from a completely different perspective, because with respect to decolonialism, this is something that they have experienced differently. They have different experiences to contribute to this historical knowledge. This knowledge has different dynamics there as well. So it's important then to, also include their knowledge and their perspectives, and not only the dominant knowledge from Europe and the West. And this is something that's just very interesting. So, we can take a look at the different forms of knowledge. For example, take a look at texts from, that have been produced in Ghana, or texts from Spivak, and we can see different connections between the texts, but at the same time, there are certain critiques with respect to the use of these texts. So there are, points of contention as well within these texts. On the other hand, so people such as Spivak, or those working in decolonial theory, they are using theories, to be precise, theories that come from, originating countries, or the countries in which they were born, or countries that they lived in for a long time before they moved to the United States. With respect to Spivak, in the most famous text, there are multiple 5 to 7 pages where Spivak just takes a look at the theory. And I think that's very, very interesting. And this would be something that we could really focus on. This would be an approach to taking a closer look at post-colonial, decolonial theory, and to ask really important questions so that we can think differently, and then at the end of the day, see differently. So thank you very much for your contributions with respect to, repetitive critiques of post-colonial histories, and the West is producing this and has a bit of a hierarchy when it comes to text production. We're also, speaking about who's being quoted, how theories are developed. That was a really important point. Those usually writing these texts are professors, have doctorates in their respective fields. I'm also taking a look at the charter that you mentioned with respect to human rights education. I also thought it was really interesting with respect to this charter and how it's being used in schools. Saraya, so you spoke about school quite a lot. We also spoke about universities. So as you said, that it's really important to create the right setting so that people can think about post-colonial and decolonial education. And how do you create this setting in schools? What is important to create these settings when you're, attempting to take a closer look at decolonial history, or when you're trying to facilitate human rights education? Was that for me? Oh, the question was for everybody. But I was just thinking, because you work in a school, that you'd be the best to answer this question. But, there's lots of archives. There's also different settings in which people can learn. Not necessarily institutional places. So could you facilitate post-colonial education, human rights education in different settings other than the more traditional ones? Saraya, perhaps you can say a few words. Well, I think that school is more traditional. Of course, I can speak with the colleagues and the students in greater detail about this. We can take a look at the different opportunities that exist to learn in greater detail. And this is something that we include in our lessons. However, this is not specific to post and decolonial theory. This would then fall under the label of, material taught in lessons that is perhaps bordering on discrimination. But, we also take a look at, important things such as, discrimination against children, the right to that children have to being able to learn in a discrimination-free setting. These are things that we can look at. There's a lot of potential in this regard. We can ask ourselves how we can facilitate these settings, and also we're asking ourselves how we're giving out grades. Linking to what one of the other speakers said, some people have an easier time learning sitting at a table, reading a text, having a teacher speak at the front, and other students need different methods of learning. But I have to say, at the end of the day, it all, it really depends on the teacher, what the teacher is bringing to the room. At school, there are certain limitations, we can't go out as often. Have to ask myself how often I'm able to go out. Sometimes I do want to leave the school, but in order to leave the school, this is also, associated with a lot of bureaucratic work to take the students somewhere outside of the school. For example, I've tried to do different things with the students. We, take a walk in the city, we ask ourselves where we are, we ask ourselves questions like, so where are we right now? We are, in a public space, or we ask ourselves, where are we now? We would then answer, we're in, an academic academy. So we want to just get an idea of where we are, but, I have to say at the end of the day, there are certain limitations to learning in schools. It's important for us to go out. It's important to hear the perspectives from different people, to be involved in activism, movements, but also, work on work with theoretic texts, rather. We take a closer look at all of this. We ask ourselves whether or not the texts that have been produced have been analyzed in great detail. We talk about pedagogical and ethical standards for politicians, teachers, educators, for example. We ask ourselves whether or not, the material we're producing is in conformity with the standards that, for example, have been set out by the German Institute for Human Rights. And sometimes we don't need to go out because that gives us enough material to talk about. But I wouldn't have to say this isn't a focus on post or decolonial history, but this is just rather an attempt to work with the materials that we have, in addition to giving the students the opportunity to learn the different ways of learning, or the different ways of relearning or undoing the learning they've already done. Aki, would you like to say a few words? I agree with Soraya. So I work in different settings. I work in the parliament spaces more predominantly. But just linking to what Soraya said, the what and the how is really important. When we're taking a look at decolonial and postcolonial theory, the way that we've done so historically, I would have to say there's a bit of a contradiction here. We have to take a look at how we learn. There's we don't want to just take a look at it from the perspective of being an expert at the front, imparting knowledge to those listening, like somebody teaching from the front. We want people to be working together, sharing their opinions together. So, it's really important to me to work with people and, enable people to share their feelings in this setting. although it's important to me, it's difficult for me, however, to facilitate that within the actual classroom. You know, in the settings that I work in, we don't usually work with PowerPoint presentations. I worked with Céline Berry at the Technical University, for example, and we worked on the feminist perspective of decolonization. And within the university, we questioned certain theories. We also asked ourselves which theories we want to focus on. We, of course, taking a look at social activism. We are also, you know, taking a look at texts, as we heard previously, come from the West, the global North. But we're always asking ourselves, you know, who the publishers are, of course. But it's very important for us at the same time to introduce as many people from the global South to the fore. We want to have different formats as well. We want to have a dialogue with these authors. We want to be working, you know, for example, from a person from the global North and with a person from the global South, and, you know, put them into a discussion situation so that we can show similarities and differences between the two. We also, you know, speak together about evaluations within institutions. We ask our students as well, and also ourselves as well, how we can evaluate them, how we should evaluate them. We ask ourselves what types of criteria we would use to evaluate them. This poses limitations for us. It's difficult for us, however, not standardize this, because we would prefer to look at everybody individually and see how they learn individually. But these are questions that we are indeed asking ourselves. We had a session recently where we created groups of people who have no problem speaking in front of others, and then there was a group of people who don't like speaking in front of others, and there are people who sometimes speak in front of others. And then we asked each other, you know, why is it so? Why does this group like speaking in front of others, and why do other groups not like speaking in front of others? And in doing so, it helps us understand each other better. Some of us, you know, bring gummy bears and music to class, so, you know, that we can encourage people to speak. We're taking a look, you know, at just different ways of working together. And in order to do that, we need to understand each other. We need to have good relationships with people who are different from us. We don't want to have any hierarchies in the classroom where some people know more than others. Sometimes when people don't know which terms they can use in class, which is politically correct or not, this also hinders learning, because people don't speak up because they're scared of saying the wrong thing. So these are questions that I think about, for example, in an educational setting, and these are questions that we also speak about in the educational setting. You know, young people, I have to say, want to know what's politically correct to say, or what is the right answer to the questions of today. Well, we always say to people, that's the answer that we can give you now, but in a few months, these answers will look different.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I don't want to say decolonial, but it's kind of going into that direction with what you just said, to have these small groups and talk about it, talk about all that's not part of the curriculum at schools, at universities, and thinking about how to transform that. Maria, would you like to add something? Yeah, maybe just very quickly. I have one story that I often enjoy telling. I read something in the newspaper once, many years back. There was a prize awarded to the best school in North Rhine-Westphalia. They asked the director of the school, the head teacher, "Are you the best school now?" But we noticed that it is a school of what we in Germany call Brennpunkt, an area with many social issues, with a high number of children with a migratory background. And the journalist was astonished by that, said, "How can you be the best school in North Rhine-Westphalia?" And then the head teacher said, "Well, it's easy. I didn't stick to the curriculum. That's how we became the best school in the state." And I just loved that. Because the state's government awarded her a prize saying, "You're the best school." And her reply was, "Yes, just because I didn't do what you told me to." And suddenly it all works. And I think that shows it very clearly. We have all these norms. We have our curriculums. And curriculum in English means curriculum at schools, what you need to teach, but it's also a list of what you did in your life. When we apply somewhere, we send a curriculum vitae. So that's very interesting, that word and what it stands for. And I love the story that is linked to that curriculum and the school in North Rhine-Westphalia. It shows a great way of dealing with norms. I don't even look at the curriculum. I think about how to work with the titles, the topics I need to teach. What I personally believe is important is to accept one's own fragility. I can always fail as a teacher. It's not that I always go there and I pass my knowledge on to students, and the students, they take it in and they are happy about it. That's not how it works. I am always questioned, doubted, and I think it doesn't matter how we teach, there is always a risk of failure linked to teaching. And there's one aspect where I really try to break these structures down, but there is one point where there is a high level of criticism, where I am being criticized for being a teacher, maybe. But maybe that criticism is kind of misplaced. In different contexts, we have this figure, a person bringing knowledge with them to pass it on. It's a kind of a gift, not something that is forced upon others, that knowledge. It is something the teacher brings with them, and then everybody works with that knowledge. And often I feel like the students hope that that person, that teacher coming, brings knowledge with them. That is a kind of gift, and it's not something that needs to be punished or sanctioned. And that's why I prepare myself well. I try to answer all the questions I'm being asked by students, and I talk a lot. Because there are traditions that I believe to be important. Storytelling, knowledge, passing on knowledge. Not only presenting PowerPoint slides, showing a film, having everybody talk. And often over the past years, I've experienced that the lesson is over, but we're still talking, and I tell them, "People, you need to leave now." And they reply, "But it's so exciting, it's so inspiring." And then I tell them, "Yeah, but I'm not paid for overtime, so please leave." Just a joke. I'm a great speaker, I believe, but there is always the hope, the wish that students become part of a podcast, or that's my wish, rather, to really have that storytelling, to talk to each other and exchange ideas. Passing on knowledge is not something scary. It can be great to listen, to then be invited to participate and contribute. And that's my experience most of the time. Sometimes you fail, but that's also part of it. To really accept that and take on that approach of really initiating an exchange. And then I'd like to add one more point. Aki also described it. It is hard work. It is hard work to find texts. and people, texts and people that we can use, not from the global north or global west, wherever, but that are still valuable for our work. And that's what I always endeavor to do. Whenever I teach, I don't only want to work on texts from the US. I always make sure to look at my students. Are there any Spanish speakers? Are they able to propose texts that we can read, that we can maybe translate together and then work on? Or texts from other languages? It's not always possible, but it's important to me to have that option. That is another kind of teaching and educating the students, new perspectives, new experiences that they can then read about, instead of only the traditional classic texts of post-colonial theories or democracy, whatever. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that important points that you mentioned, this ambivalence that we always have. All teachers said it. The teachers said it here. It's always expected of them to really bring the knowledge. But sometimes we need storytelling. Students want their questions answered. And then, if we're all lucky, we have that exchange of ideas and thoughts. We've mentioned it before, but we're focusing on human rights education. It's not always taught expressly at schools or universities. So I'd like to get back to that. When planning this event, that we thought about the different definitions of human rights education. One of the definitions is learning through human rights. So learning and personally dealing and working on human rights and what that means in an environment of learning and an environment that really upholds human rights. And that might be something to talk about, because today's question is whether we have even an option to have a post-colonial, decolonial human rights education, whether that is possible even. So do you think it's possible, or do you see other approaches? I'm not sure if I've understood the question correctly. I think human rights education at schools is often about how they first developed. It's about articles, it's about 3 speeches that we listen to or that we read, and then we have a worksheet and that's it. Because then we'll be able to reproduce the history of human rights. Maybe there's another group activity on it, or on the dignity of all humans. But then it's a challenge to link that to what Aki and Maria also said. Link that to questions. How to learn from that together. That's the real challenge. In the classrooms I've been teaching, I've encountered different backgrounds, cultures, families, different personalities, people with different situations in life, with different standings in life, different religions. And it's important to see where there are frictions and how to really include everybody in the process and link that to difficult questions concerning human rights, whether that's at school, at other institutions, and whether we talk about colonialism or national socialism, etc. It's always the same. It's a question of how to include everybody and how to approach that. For example, you could do a code of learning. You could really write your own code of conduct and then look at the Human Rights Charter as a comparison, you could talk about decolonial, postcolonial criticism and other aspects of that topic, because that's what makes this exciting. Thinking about how to really address all students, because what's working for 3 or 4 students might not work for the rest of the class. Or questions like freedom of speech, solidarity, democracy. How can we incorporate that? Do we work with the principle of finding a consensus or with majority rule? Those are all questions we need to think about when teaching. Yes, of course, I'm not part of the learning group itself as a teacher. I'm in a different position. I have to grade the students' work. But at the same time, I am kind of a part of that group of learners. And yes, it's true, storytelling is important everywhere, particularly in the global south, because there it plays a major role. There are questions of how to learn through stories that are being told. I think that's the same everywhere in the world, although the way of telling stories might vary in different countries and cultures. But that's where we can start. That's a good starting point, really including everybody, even when criticizing human rights and the idea of human rights as they are. And that's where it becomes fascinating, also for me as a teacher, because I'm constantly learning myself, also due to the questions being asked in that learning space, in that group of learners. And I think that's where a lot happens, a lot evolves and changes, a lot that's very valuable for those learning about human rights, those being educated. Aki also said it, students need something they can work with, but we also need to find something that we can write tests about. Whenever I have to do that, whenever I have to plan a test for students, I need to find questions to ask, as compared to French tests. If you learn the language, you have tests on grammar, on vocabulary, etc. So you have to find the right solutions, and in the end, you get your test back and you think, that was wrong, because it always depends. Do I need the imparfait? Do I need the passé composé? Which grammatical tense do I need? There is a right answer and all the rest is wrong, because I need to find the intention. Why am I using which tense? And then I need to find the correct grammatical form. We have all these different considerations. And that's the same for human rights. We have all these different considerations, which is the right answer for that issue. And that's what makes it interesting, because it's all about the individual students. What languages do they speak? What's their mother tongue? Who is familiar with human rights and the different degrees of human rights? Now there seems to be a technical issue. Yes, we can't hear Soraya anymore. She's frozen. Yes, Soraya, unfortunately you froze, your screen froze in the middle of what you said, but still thank you very much. It was a great contribution. Yes, it's always difficult to talk about these different legacies of colonial experiences also, and to find a way to include everybody and to find a way or an approach to learn together in a group of very individual students. Anybody who'd like to add something? Maria? Yes, I think it's great. In the end, I heard you speak about the French language, and that is a great comparison. We have different languages, and we see that we can say different things in different languages. Some have specific words for ideas, others don't. Because there are no recipes, no recipe for success. Everybody has to see for themselves what works and what doesn't. But in Europe, I think there is one key to success. Why not learn one non-European language? Only one. One non-European language. So one non-colonial language. And that can be an interesting experience, an experiment, because you get to know all these different terms. You experience a different kind of grammar, and you become emotional in a wholly new way when learning a new language, because you connect these emotions to the language. And I think that's important for all students learning new languages. Talking about human rights from a post-colonial perspective, I think that human rights can only be taught concurrently with criticism. Criticizing human rights means learning about them. That's important, but often teachers don't do that. Human rights are seen as the norm without criticizing them. And I think that is a problem, it's an issue. And we often link human rights to our own experience. Spivak often says that there are rights in and of itself, but they are very abstract. We all sitting here in front of our screens, we all know what rights are. We can really fight for somebody's rights. If we believe that something is not right, we can do something. But there is always a friction between rights and justice. People know about the rights, but they don't know about justice in the abstract sense. So that might be something that's really important when working with groups, to give them the possibility to think abstract. What I'm saying is now very abstract, but it's about these concepts. I noticed in my work, it's not only about these different groups, about marginalized groups, for example, it's also about the students, about teaching them how to grasp what rights actually mean, what they are. And now my last point, criticizing human rights is how to teach human rights from a post-colonial perspective, that is to say. Plus, we need to teach the history of human rights by really working on them, by processing what they mean, and by thinking about their use when trying to liberate cultures from colonialism. We had, for example, Haiti and the French Revolution, all that context. Reading texts about that is so important, because the people in Haiti said, okay, all humans are equal. That includes us as well. So that led to a successful revolution that then in the end failed after all. That's all part of the history of that country. But to read these texts is important in order to use them to liberate oneself. Human rights play a major role, not only with regards to liberation from colonial statuses, but they also play a major role in being criticized. It is a challenge, but it's feasible. I really believe that we can do that. Saraya said that that's what she's doing in school, really talking about one position, but then also opposing that or linking that to another position. I heard somebody say, or Karl Marx wrote in one of his texts, something like, people don't need diplomas to understand that the world is not a just place. We don't need to learn that at school, we know that. But changing the world, that is something where we need an understanding how that justice came about. And that's a challenge. So then Karl Marx addresses the workers and says, that's the mountain you need to climb. And that's what I think we need for human rights. We understand when something is not just, not right, but we need to understand the background, the history of it all. We need to understand the challenges, the problems, in order to really use that knowledge, use those ideas.
Thank you very much. So you spoke about how we can talk about colonial contradictions when it comes to human rights education, and how we can also facilitate human rights education, taking into consideration also the critiques as well. This helps us also to include post and decolonial historical perspectives, take these into consideration. Also take a look at the different movements that have taken place. I just wanted to add something. When it comes to human rights education, when it comes to schools in particular, I think that there's, the point that there's a lot of requirements that teachers have to adhere to. When it comes to the administrations of these schools, as a teacher, I have to make sure that, I'm being inclusive, I have to be anti-discriminatory. We don't usually call that anti-discrimination within the classrooms, we call it rather diversity. We also have to take queer rights into consideration. We also have to speak about sustainability, taking care of our climate. But this is also a great opportunity for teachers. Teachers sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed with all of these requirements. We, would like to bring all of these requirements together. And in doing so, we can, deal with postcolonialism, decolonialism at the same time as we're dealing with anti-Semitism, for example. So we can just deal with everything together, all of these issues together, as opposed to all of these issues individually. And, in this context, we, have to ask ourselves a lot of really important questions. You pointed out the difference between justice and rights. This is something that is quite important, and it's important to educate students with respect to the rights in the post-colonial, decolonial times. And I think it's important that we get the perspectives of, the legal scholars in this regard, and that's all I wanted to add at this juncture. So it seems that teachers, have everything that they need to cover, and you can just, put everything under one hat or one umbrella, so to speak, and teach everything at the same time. Aki, would you like to add anything? Well, I just was, thinking about how this could perhaps play a role for me. I don't, work specifically in the same areas that you do, but when it comes to empowerment spaces, we want to speak about awareness, and, talking about something is, perhaps an infringement. We want to, however, talk about it, and, we want to talk about everything openly, and that we have the right to do so. When it comes to empowerment, we also ask ourselves, what type of tools we have to deal with the different contradictions that take place, and that, we also want to empower people to hold these differences. At the same time, perhaps people have, differentiating opinions that they're holding at the same time. We also have different tools that we're using, and we're wanting to use these tools to help people to develop. Now, when it comes to implicit critiques, the first generation of human rights are focused more so on the individual. We see this as well in the empowerment space. But in the empowerment space, we're talking more so about the collective. You know, there are lots of movements that are trying, you know, to use human rights as a tool to help us achieve something in the empowerment space, but this is something that is more done so in a collective space. We're also asking ourselves how we can get away from the different contexts, how we can, you know, take a look at the individual human rights, how we can implement these when the social conditions are present. When it comes to migrant communities, you know, this plays a very key role. When can certain roles play, or rather rights play a certain role in these communities, and what types of resources these communities are able to understand and use. Now, with respect to language, so German is a very monolingual context, I have to say, or rather it's a more dominant narrative that we are monolingual, which is not the case worldwide, I have to say. You know, it's important that people learn other languages other than the European languages, or rather use texts that need to be translated that are not coming from European countries. I was in a prop seminar, and in the seminar, you know, I used different literature from Beirut, for example. Yeah, this literature needs to be translated, but I'm not sure if the teachers that I worked with on this prop seminar even have the rights to use these materials. And then we talk about why it's a problem if they are indeed not allowed to use these materials. So, you know, students, you know, have a difficult time, you know, using different sources not stemming from the European room in their theses. And this is something that we can help the students with and talk about with in greater detail. I just wanted to add something there because I just thought it was really interesting what you just said there, Aki. So now with respect to what students don't know, well, students are able to write their thesis in any language, but they need to have two examiners who can speak and understand this language. But these students do have a right to write their thesis in every language, but you know, not all students know about this right that they have. I just wanted to say that. I didn't know that either, that the students have the right to do that. Sandra has just said to me that we are running out of time a little bit, but there are lots of questions here that are really great. Just to close off, I would like to say a few keywords, throw them into the room. So now when it comes to educational processes, we talked about how they can be facilitated from a financial perspective. When it comes to, supporting programs, political education, democracy education, you know, keeping this in mind with the current political landscape. Are there challenges here? Is it difficult to create, you know, human rights facilitating educational settings? We, you know, have also been hearing the word decolonization as a buzzword, as Soraya said. You know, it's really difficult for administrations to focus on this because perhaps they need to then, you know, not use the materials that they already have. There are certain contradictions as well with respect to education that are present. You know, also looking forward, we are in defense mode. We're talking a lot about the things that we don't want. We are finding ourselves in a difficult political situation. Speaking about, you know, societal utopias. We, you know, would like to perhaps work together to think about what we want to achieve moving forward. So I just said a few different, words, buzzwords from the questions. Message to the panelists, if you can pick up on whatever you want to speak about, I'll leave it up to you. You're the experts. You can say whatever you want. Who would like to start? Yeah, I just like to say one thing with respect to dreams. So what's my dream? Well, rather, my vision is that we are able to dream more. I don't think that we dream a lot. We're able to dream a lot because we're most of the time in defense mode. We're responding, reacting a lot. But there's not a lot of settings in which we can really think about what we want, what we're dreaming for ourselves. And that's something that I would really hope for, is that there are more settings and spaces where we can create these visions, as opposed to getting into the defense mode, as asking ourselves what we want to achieve moving forward. Now, with respect to the frameworks, of course, we need to have financing for programs. There's no revolution that's going to be financed from the state, for example. But we do need financing at the same time, because with financing we create open spaces, but we're opening these spaces up via financing from capitalist systems. So we're asking ourselves, what kind of settings are these at the end of the day? We also would like to encourage the civil society to think about this a bit more and organize themselves, as opposed to always relying just on the state to foster these programs. So, putting a focus on self-organization, grassroots projects, so to speak. Mar? Who would like to say the next remarks? So my last name is Castro. You said the word revolution. I'll speak then. I have never seen a revolution funded by the state. That would be, it's a bit of a contradiction there, that we're trying to get, financing and also money for the work that we're doing. We need to live our lives, but this money comes from capitalism. At the same time, we need to really think about human rights education and whether or not it should take place in state-funded formats, state-funded institutes. And, I'm of the opinion that they shouldn't only take this type of education shouldn't only take place within these institutes. So education can take place anywhere. You can educate yourself when you're just talking with 5 different friends about politics. This is when politics take place. This is when education takes place, because we educate each other. That's why we need to make it clear that this is educational resources, so to speak, because we can learn from the different experience of others. In seminars, however, and this is something that I really dream about, this is something that I would really like, and I share Aki's opinion. I really hope that we can dream more. I hope we can work more together with artists, for example, artists that can encourage us to think a little bit more outside of the box. My hope is that we have a group of 40 students, and that out of these 40 students, 4 of these students take their knowledge and are able to pass it on to 40 other people. And theory inspires movements. We want these buzzwords to transform into real acts that people are living out in their daily lives. I have to say that we're really, really living in difficult times. There are crises surrounding us, but we are really, really experiencing challenging times. We have an increase in right-wing extremism in Germany, or right-wing parties. And these are, parties that are, really critical of the existing critical thought. We're seeing this in Saxony and Thuringia. Those are states in Germany. We also are seeing conflictual opinions when it comes to Israel and Palestine. Here we're seeing a delegitimization of human rights that is taking place there. And we need to create spaces to talk about that. We don't even have places to talk about that right now. We're seeing attacks on the settings in which we can talk about these things. We're seeing attacks on those spaces to think in an emancipatory way. We need to push back against this because we need to make sure these settings remain open. We don't want to start a revolution, of course, but we don't want to destroy what we have already and at the same time fight against, some of the norms that are existing right now. I know a lot of people, for example, who don't want to live in Germany anymore, and these are, opinions that I can really understand.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Of course, it's a very particular perspective talking about schools and students there. I think this visionary thinking really towards the future is important. Also when thinking about criticism towards human rights education, it's just part of it. Also in the context of political education and politics classes at school. I often talk to my students about political strategies, and then we notice most of these so-called strategies are not strategies at all. Those are just measures put together, here a measure, there a measure, etc. We do that also in order to be able to utter our criticism, a criticism with a great foundation below it. Also when criticizing some social welfare measures like Bürgergeld that we have in Germany, a kind of social support, or when talking about prisons, youth prisons. I talk about all these things with my students. Apart from that, apart from what we've seen during these last elections, we've experienced and noticed, I believe, that we don't actually need parties like AfD, like the Alternative for Germany, because we have a very authoritative safety policy, irrespective of 7th October and everything that has happened there. It all had happened before already, all these fights and challenges regarding neutrality, the Beutelsbach consensus. For schools, it's very important to look at what's happening right now. There are also extracurricular opportunities to learn about politics outside of schools. It's important to see what can easily happen and what cannot happen. Describing that and controlling political education is a topic. Berlin is one example. We have these new positions that are established right now. But we have that in other political bodies and other situations as well. We have the frameworks that we are used to, but now something else is happening. One of the framework that we're used to is that we really honor human rights, but that is a complete opposite of other things coming up, of other kind of movements coming up now. We've talked about that today on this panel. There are movements against emancipation coming from all directions. There are many who just pretend to be decolonial, but are actually against emancipation of peoples and cultures. So that's where we need to become active at the school level, but I fear that this might not be possible for much longer. We are facing major challenges that individual teachers are facing too, if they are not supported by institutions like the German Institute for Human Rights, or by their professors at university. They need some kind of support so that they know they do the right thing, that they know where to go, what to do. And I think we should worry about these kinds of development, because it's been part of the system for a long time, yes, but there is so much more happening right now in the areas of security and in the political area with an authoritative system. And I don't think that we necessarily need the alternative for Germany to show us that. We have other parties doing that too. Yeah, thank you very much for all your valuable contributions. I've learned so much. Now, Sandra, the floor is yours, because you told me there are many questions in the chat already. Yeah, several questions. So we are going to stop the recording now, because we'd like to start the interactive part of this event. We are